friend of mine who serves a congregation in my home state of Indiana was trying to figure out how to deal with significant growth in his congregation. Growth always causes some crankiness. Even positive change is hard. And one particularly vocal member of the congregation was just really grouchy about the crowds. He said to the minister, "There are just too many people here now. We don't need church growth. We have plenty of people as it is." To which the minister risked his job to reply, "Whom do you think we should ask not to come next Sunday?" He's a real smart aleck. They ended up building a new sanctuary, and as far as I know, the growth hasn't stopped. Some things are just not ours to control. A congregation is partly an idea. It's a set of values to be passed down from generation to generation. We don't get a vote on whether to share our good news or which folks to accept as members. We could say the same about a country. It's a promise, in a way. It's an idea meant to offer a welcome to the next generation, which is always on its way. You could say that, but not everyone agrees. Quote, "In some parts of the country, it does seem like the America we know and love doesn't exist anymore." So began Fox News host Laura Ingram's racist, xenophobic rant aired on the network last week. This is the person who told LeBron to shut up and dribble when he criticized the president. She once said that terrorism is the price we pay for multiculturalism, though far more acts of terror are committed by white Americans than by other people. No dog whistles. Last week's was one more instance of loud and proud anti-immigrant speech. She went on to say, quote, "Massive demographic changes have been foisted upon the American people. And they're changes that none of us ever voted for, and most of us don't like." She said she was referring to undocumented and documented immigration, or in her words, legal and illegal immigration. What was Ingram, who, by the way, has a daughter adopted from Guatemala, what was she getting on about here? She says she wasn't talking about race, though that assertion became a lot harder to defend after David Duke endorsed her tirade. Was she suggesting that every person in the country should have a say in whom we allow to live here? Maybe we should vote on every person who crosses our border by name and whether they'll be allowed to stay. Certainly one thing is true. The America that she was describing, the one before all the new folks moved in, evidently, was, first of all, pretend, but second of all, more white than today's America. Ingram was giving voice to what some have taken to calling white anxiety, the fear that immigrants, mostly people of color, are overrunning the country and taking jobs and resources that rightfully belong to white Americans. She was promoting what some people call a culture of white supremacy, in which it is assumed that white people should be in charge and should receive most of the benefits of our society. She was called out for it by no other than conservative pundit S.E. Cupp, who wrote in an editorial, "To many, Laura, that sounded racist. That's because it is," she said. She isn't complaining that the country's getting older or younger, richer or poorer, that we're having more or fewer children or moving to the suburbs. She's complaining that people who come to America from other countries, even legally, are making this country unrecognizable to her. Indeed, to us. And who us means is also clear. Cupp said, Fox News viewers who are predominantly 65 and older and white. And she concluded, "I know many of those viewers, and I'm sad to say that message probably resonated a lot with them." End quote. Well, like it or not, the trends that Ingram lamented are not changing anytime soon. As the Washington Post reported last week, 3/4 of Americans think immigration is a good thing, a number that has increased since Donald Trump announced his candidacy for president. as many Americans now believe that immigration should be increased as believe it should be decreased. Pew Research reports that migration from Mexico became net negative between 2009 and 2014. More people are leaving the U.S. from Mexico now than are coming here from there. China and India are now the largest sources of migrants to the U.S. And large percentages of migrants to the U.S. now are professional people, attending university, getting good jobs, improving our society. Pew reports by 2055, the U.S. will not have a single racial or ethnic majority. Much of this change has been and will be, Pew says, driven by immigration. Nearly 59 million immigrants have arrived in the U.S. in the past 50 years. 59 million in the past 50 years, mostly from Latin America and Asia. Today, a near record 14% of the country's population is foreign-born, compared to just 5% in 1965. 14% today, compared to 5% in 1965. Over the next 5 decades, the majority of U.S. population growth is projected to be linked to new Asian and Latino-Latina immigration. And Pew concludes, American attitudes about immigration and diversity are supportive of those changes for the most part. More Americans say immigrants strengthen the country than they say burden it. And most say the U.S.'s increasing ethnic diversity makes it a better place to live. That's Pew. In our country, being American has often been confused with being white and also with being Christian. A whole lot of people, as we all know, think the United States was founded as a Christian nation and advocate a sort of Christian theocracy. But in the 7 years from 2007 to 2014 alone, the number of Americans who identify as Christian dropped from 78 to 71%, a percentage point per year over those 7 years. Friends, the majority white country that existed just after World War II is no longer. We as a nation are stuck in a moment of national glory from the 1940s, in some ways, but that era of suppression of all but white male Americans is ending. Isn't that wonderful? The change is tremendous, and the direction is clear, away from a culture of white dominance and colonialism toward a wider embrace of true diversity. Much of the hate we see and hear right now, I'm convinced, is a lashing out against these trends toward pluralism. In other words, it is racism. It's sad, but it shouldn't surprise us. We may see ourselves as a shining city on a hill, but a whole lot of our history tells a different story. But friends, there is no going back. And why would we want to? When we're no longer afraid of people whose stories aren't the same as ours, our lives become richer. When we act out of the abundance that surrounds us rather than out of the fear that all will go away, a more beautiful world opens around us. That beauty is straining against the ugliness of a white supremacy culture. But fear, in many ways, has already lost. This year was a World Cup year. For those of you who aren't soccer fans, every 4 years the world's ruling soccer body, FIFA, organizes a national tournament of national teams, an international tournament of national teams. The United States didn't even qualify this year, but I'll save that for a future sermon on disappointment. The 2018 World Cup was really exciting. How many of you watched some of the World Cup, even a little bit? Yeah, good. You may have read about the winners, by the way, were the French. You may have read about anti-immigrant sentiment in France. Of course, we in the United States aren't alone in anti-immigrant sentiment. There is right now a worldwide wave of anti-pluralism focused mainly on migration. But this year the world was introduced to a 19-year-old French kid named Kylian Mbappé. He became the first teenager to score a goal in the World Cup since Pelé. And after the game, Pelé said Mbappé was so good it made him want to strap on his cleats and play again. Sports pundits have taken to calling Mbappe the human roadrunner, and if you've seen him play, you'll understand why. He is fast and strong, and some people say he may become the best soccer player in the world. Pele hasn't gone that far yet. Will you throw up the image, Mike, please? Thank you. That's in the front row, on my right, your right. That's Mbappe, number 10 there. A recent article in Slate talks about the politics of Mbappe and the French soccer team. They say last summer, a Nike ad on the side of an apartment building in Bondy, the suburb of Paris where Mbappe played as a kid, projected the 19-year-old striker 5 stories high. The slogan said, "Bondy, city of possibilities." But Slate says, some possibilities. Bondy is in a region in France that wraps around Paris to the north and east, formerly part of the city's red belt of working-class white communities that reliably voted communist. It has in recent decades become home to the children and grandchildren of immigrants from France's African colonies. These cities, one bleeding into the next in some of the densest suburbs in the Western world, are separated from Paris only by a highway that encircles the city like a wall. But the author says they feel far away from the City of Light's monumental boulevards. If you look at a map of low-income priority neighborhoods around Paris to which the French state distributes special funds, you'll find they're concentrated in that region, which is uniformly known by its number among France's 100 departments, Department 93. This region's known as Department 93. Also concentrated there, and around Paris more generally, is soccer talent. A third of the national team was born and raised in this region around Paris. In the New York Times, Rory Smith and Ilian Piltier write that this may be the world's largest pool of soccer talent, and that there are more soccer scouts here than in any city except Sao Paulo, which is twice the size. Kids in the 93 get scooped up in great numbers by youth academies or selected for the French Soccer Academy. And they say it shows. About 2/3 of French pro soccer players now come from this region around Paris, though the area accounts for less than 20% of the country's population. So 2/3 of the players come from this region that accounts for 20% of the country's population. And here's the thing. You maybe have read headlines calling France's World Cup win a win for immigrants. But these guys aren't immigrants. Yes, 15 of the 23 players on France's World Cup team have African heritage. But of that 15, 13 were born in France. And the other 2 immigrated to France when they were 2 years old. They are French. This is what France looks like. And no matter who likes it and who doesn't, this is what France looks like. Their win has sparked a new round of conversations about ethnicity and religion in France, who, by the way, went in hard on the colorblind, we don't see color thing years ago and now really don't have a mechanism for having this conversation. But this team, their success, is moving the conversation forward. It isn't all positive, but it's moving forward. In an essay entitled Fear of a Black France, Gregory Pirot wrote, "You want to troll French fascists? Tell them the truth. The most French man in the world right now is a black kid named Mbappe." Maybe we could also say that the most American people in the world right now are second-generation Muslim American women who are running for elected office. The population shifts America is experiencing are not unique, and they are not temporary. It may be too much to say that the story of this team, which plays together really well and whose members seem to genuinely have come to love one another, can serve as an example for all of us. I don't know if it bears that weight. But to me, it certainly is one more piece of evidence that pluralism isn't just winning. It has won. These kids' parents came from Africa and changed French culture. If you're a sports fan, a soccer fan particularly, for the better. France hasn't always been known for its love of soccer, but these days the country is bonkers for these kids. Little white kids in Paris are running around with jerseys bearing the names of Muslim immigrants and the children of Muslim immigrants. The seeds of a better future, perhaps. Though we can sense its coming victory, we will never be done fighting for pluralism. The notion that, as different as we are, we can live together in harmony. We will never be done resisting oppression. So I think we have to do two things that might seem paradoxical. Maybe they are. I know I say this a lot, but I'll say it again. We need a North Star. We need to keep in mind the North Star of true pluralism, an image of America and a world in which human diversity is celebrated rather than feared. If we don't know where we're going, we'll surely miss the mark. We can set that intention and move toward it faithfully all our lives. But second, I think we have to realize that we will not see that world ourselves. We won't. And then we must adapt our definition of success. In capitalist countries like ours, success often means acquisition. Even when it comes to social justice, we think we're successful if we conquer racism and acquire the promised land. It doesn't seem to work that way. Instead, we start with the world as it is. And then we use meditation maybe, or some other technique to calm our minds enough to really be able to stay in it and notice what's happening around us, as bad as it is. When we've seen the world as it is, we can gauge what actions we can take to move things forward a bit. And the answer is not to take every action that comes our way. We would lose our minds. I would lose my mind, maybe you wouldn't. And success doesn't mean, it seems to me, eradication of xenophobia. We really have almost no control over that outcome. Success, it seems to me, is faithfulness. To live lives that keep to the path of unity and diversity. To be faithful to the call of love itself. We would do well to make faithfulness to the call of love the measure of our lives. I believe that we're experiencing the birth pangs of a new world, one that shuns the deadly forces of colonialism and the resulting culture of white supremacy, and instead appreciates the beauty of human diversity. So let us work. And as we work, may our measure of success be the living of lives that move us a little closer to that reality. Amen.